This is Bill Nye debating Ken Ham at the Answers in Genesis Creation Museum or whatever. This debate happened a while back, but it's fascinating to go back and watch now. So I figured we'd give it a watch, see what they had to say for themselves, listen to the best arguments from the creationists, from the young earth creationist side, specifically young earth creationists, and listen to Bill Nye refute those ideas. I'm jumping in a little bit because they have, short intros where they talk to people and have them chuckle and all that stuff. So I'm just jumping right into where the debate kind of starts. They get 5 minutes each to give their opening statements, and then they have a 30-minute stretch each to give their full argument, and then they have a back and forth, I think. So let's give this a listen, see what they have to say. And while we do, we're going to play some Breath of the Wild. I'm just farming dragon scales at this immediate moment. All right, let's give this a listen.
So here tonight, we're going to have two stories, and we can compare Mr. Hamm's story to the story from what I will call the outside, from mainstream science. The question tonight is, does Ken Ham's creation model hold up? Is it viable?
The answer is no.
So let me ask you all, what would you be doing if you weren't here tonight? That's right, you'd be home watching CSI Petersburg. Is that coming? I think it's coming. And on CSI, there is no distinction made between historical science and observational science. These are constructs unique to Mr. Hamm. We don't normally...
Right, so Ken Ham in the beginning, he gave like a short opener, and his opener... he basically said, there's historical science and then there's observational science. You don't know what happened because you weren't there. Basically, we don't know. He believes that dinosaurs existed with humans, and at the Creation Museum, they actually have dinosaurs that have saddles on their backs because they believe that they were ridden by human beings. It's insane on so many levels, I don't even know what to do with it. Anyway, he says that observational science and historical science are different, and that's just absurd. We use the same scientific techniques everywhere, in every area. They're well-established scientific paradigms that we've been using for millennia, honestly. Anyway, let's keep listening here.
Normally have these anywhere in the world except here. Natural laws that applied in the past apply now. That's why they're natural laws. That's why we embrace them. That's how we made all these discoveries that enabled all this remarkable technology. So CSI is a fictional show, but it's based absolutely on real people doing real work. When you go to a crime scene and find evidence, you have clues about the past. And you trust those clues, and you embrace them, and you move forward to convict somebody.
Let me tell you the ultimate point of this debate. The bottom line, why does Ken Ham believe this stuff when there is evidence to the contrary? There's evidence against the claims of Ken Ham. Ken Ham is completely uninformed in this area, and we can directly refute what he says. Why? Why does he believe it anyways? The answer is because the Bible said so. That's it. That's what this whole debate boils down to. The Bible says so. And ultimately, that's what, Muslims believe their stuff for. Because the Quran says so. I believe it because I have faith. And you know what? Fine. Okay. You have faith. You want to believe it on faith? Okay, fine. I don't care. But don't contradict scientific facts in the name of faith. That's my only real issue. You want to have faith, you want to believe in God because you believe in God, okay. Don't contradict it because of faith.
Mr. Hamm and his followers have this remarkable view of a worldwide flood that somehow influenced everything that we observe in nature. A 500-foot wooden boat, 8 zookeepers for 14,000 individual animals, every land plant in the world underwater for a full year. I ask us all, is that really reasonable? You'll hear a lot about the Grand Canyon, I imagine, also, which is a remarkable place, and it has fossils. And the fossils in the Grand Canyon are found in layers. There is not a single place in the Grand Canyon where the fossils of one type of animal cross over into the fossils of another. In other words, when there was a big flood on the earth, you would expect drowning animals to swim up to a higher level. Not any one of them did.
Maybe their mom didn't teach them to swim, okay?
Not a single one. If you could find evidence of that, my friends, you could change the world. Now, I just want to remind us all, there are billions of people in the world who are deeply religious.
This is a key, important point, and this is my perspective on the entire conversation also.
Who get enriched, who have a wonderful sense of community from their religion. They worship together, they eat together, they live in their communities and enjoy each other company. Billions of people, but these same people do not embrace the extraordinary view that the earth is somehow only 6,000 years old. That is unique. And here's my concern. What keeps the United States ahead, what makes the United States a world leader, is our technology, our new ideas, our innovations. If we continue to eschew science, eschew the process, and try to divide science into observational science and historic science, we are not going to move forward. We will not embrace natural laws. We will not make discoveries. We will not invent and innovate and stay ahead. So if you ask me if Ken Hamm's creation model is viable, I say no. It is absolutely not viable.
It simply isn't.
So stay with us over the next period, and you can compare my evidence to his. Thank you all very much.
All right, now I think they get 30 minutes each from this point forward.
Very nice start by both of our debaters here. And now each one will offer a 30-minute illustrated presentation to fully offer their case for us to consider. Mr. Hamm, you're up.
Okay, just dead air. Fantastic idea. I love that they both have Macs, though. And look, check it out. I never noticed this. There's a little timer in the bottom right corner here. It says 30 minutes. Interesting.
Well, the debate topic was, is creation a viable model of origins in today's modern scientific era? And I made this statement at the end of my opening statement. Creation is the only viable model of historical science confirmed by observational science in today's modern scientific era. And I said, what we need to be doing is actually defining our terms, and particularly three terms: science, creation, and evolution.
You mean redefining terms, changing the way that the rest of the world uses these terms. Right, okay?
Now, I discussed the meaning of the word science and what is meant by experimental or observational science briefly, and that both creationists and evolutionists can be great scientists, for instance. I mentioned Craig Venter, a biologist. He's an atheist, and he's a great scientist. He was one of the first researchers to sequence the human genome. I also mentioned Dr. Raymond Damadian, who actually invented the MRI scanner.
Here's the thing about what he's talking about right now. These people can be great scientists and also atheist or Christian or even young earth creationists. It's possible to be any of those things. That being said, when a young earth creationist goes into a scientific discipline, they suspend their young earth creationist views in favor of logic and reason and rationality. Whether they want to admit that or not, whether they realize it consciously or not, they must suspend their ridiculous, nonsensical, illogical views to operate in this area or in this discipline. They must, and they do. So Raymond Damadian is a young earth creationist, believes the earth was created in 6 literal 24-hour days 6,000 years ago. And he created the MRI scanner. Obviously, an incredibly influential and intelligent inventor and doctor, I believe. A scientist. When he goes into that lab, he sets his creationism aside. Whether he wants to admit that or not, he does. The creationism bit is an exception to his logical thinking, not the rule.
I want you to meet a biblical creationist who is a scientist and inventor.
Hi, my name is Dr. Raymond Damadian. I am
This is the guy I was talking about.
a young Earth creation scientist and believe that God created the world in 6 24-hour days, just as recorded in the book of Genesis.
That's not really what the book of Genesis says. I mean, first of all, the book of Genesis has like a billion different explanations, and it's been interpreted a billion different ways. And also, it was not written as historical. It wasn't written as a historical narrative. It was a completely different genre of writing that doesn't really exist anymore. But okay. Quick addendum to that. The book of Genesis is actually a compilation of like 17 different stories or something. It's all split up across different chapters and verses. Those origin stories are really just like campfire myths. A lot of them had no real truth value to them. They weren't expected to be believed as truth. It wasn't written as historical narrative. Some of it probably was, some of it was not. Genesis is a collection of books, really, not a single book in its own right, as I'm sure you'll notice if you just read the first 5 chapters of it.
By God's grace and the devoted prayers of my godly mother-in-law, I invented the MRI scanner in 1969. The idea that scientists who believe the Earth is 6,000 years old cannot do real science is simply wrong.
No, you can do real science. You just have to set all of that stuff aside to do it. That's all.
Well, he's most adamant about that. And actually, he revolutionized medicine, and he's a biblical creationist. And I encourage children to follow people like that and make them their heroes. Let me
just tell you something. Somebody in the chat says, Robert Adsett, creationism is irrelevant to the spin of protons that NMR relies on. Whether a creationist is involved in an area of study that is affected by their young earth creationism, whether that's true or not, is irrelevant. Ultimately, their belief in a 6-day creation and that the earth is 6,000 years old is breaking logical thought and is directly contradicting what science has to say on certain subjects and directly contradicting the methods used to come to conclusions. Now, the methods that scientists used to conclude that the Earth is 4.5 billion years old are the same methods that Damadian used to conclude the ideas that he had, the methods that he used to create the MRI scanner. It's the same type of logical thought. So it may be a completely different area of study, completely unaffected. That's true enough. But the scientific method is the same across all disciplines. And he is selectively accepting the scientific method and the various types of logical thought that led him to invent the MRI machine. He's accepting it there and ignoring it when it's inconvenient to him, to his already existing ideology. That's the problem here.
introduce you to another biblical creation scientist.
My name is Danny Faulkner. I received my PhD in astronomy from Indiana University. For 26 and a half years, I was professor at the University of South Carolina, Lancaster, where I hold the rank of Distinguished Professor Emeritus. Upon my retirement from the university in January of 2013, I joined the research staff at Answers in Genesis. I'm a stellar astronomer. That means
you're a terrible dad joke teller. Usually, I tell dad jokes. This one's just bad, bro. Don't even try, okay?
Very interested in stars, but I'm particularly interested in the study of eclipsing binary stars. And I've published many articles in the astronomy literature, places such as the Astrophysical Journal, the Astronomical Journal, and the Observatory. There is nothing in observational astronomy that contradicts a recent creation.
That's complete nonsense. Are you kidding me? We see stars that are 50,000 light years away. You know how we know that they're 50,000 light years away? It's really interesting, actually. We take a look at the star, we position a telescope at a certain location, and we take a measurement. We wait 6 months until we're on the other side of the sun, and we take another measurement. Now we have two angles, and we have the length of one of the triangle legs, and we can use the Pythagorean theorem to find out how far away it is. Quick correction to that, we can only measure up to 300 light years away with this method, but if we find a supernova within those 300 light years, which we have, we know that it's a constant level of brightness that can be used to gauge how far away other stars are. Supernovas always glow the exact same level of brightness across the universe. So once we take a light measurement of a supernova within that 300 light year radius, we can figure out how far away various different galaxies are. Basic, straightforward high school math helps us figure out how far away stars are. It's not some complicated process that we don't understand because we're not intelligent enough or whatever other thing. Anybody, literally anybody can go out there and do it. Just like literally anybody can go out there and find out that the Earth is not flat. It's a super straightforward, simple calculation, a simple exercise. Take a 20-foot pole to Paris and stick it in the ground at noon, measure its shadow. Take another one to, I don't know, somewhere across, like take it to St. Petersburg, Russia, like across, way far across, and measure it at the exact same moment, and compare the lengths of the shadows. See how they differ, and use those variables to calculate the rough circumference of the Earth. That is how that stuff was calculated thousands of years ago. All of this stuff is super basic, straightforward calculation. Nothing special or intense about it. And this guy's straight up lying. He is lying to your face when he says this.
Physical Journal, the Astronomical Journal, and the Observatory. There is nothing in observational astronomy that contradicts a recent creation.
Straight up lie. We can observe the fact that stars are 50,000 light years away. He knows that.
I also mentioned Dr. Stuart Burgess, Professor of Engineering Design at Bristol University in England. Now, he designed a double-action worm gear set for the 3 hinges of the robotic arm on a very expensive satellite. And if that had not worked, if that gear set had not worked, that whole satellite would have been useless. Yet Dr. Burgess is a biblical creationist who believes...
Right. So people can, do incredible things. Whether they believe this stuff or not is irrelevant. They set their beliefs aside when they walk into a lab. That's just how it works.
Just as I believe. Now, think about this for a moment. Are scientists like Dr. Burgess, who believe in creation, just as I do, a small minority in the scientific world? But let's see what he says about scientists believing in creation.
Why do you think they're a small minority in the scientific world? You think there's a reason for that? Don't tell me it's the globalists, as Alex Jones would say. Globalists, Trotskyite, socialist, communist, Chi-Com, psyops.
I find that many of my colleagues in academia are sympathetic to the creationist viewpoint, including biologists.
I bet. Biologists are sympathetic to creationist viewpoints, 100%, totally.
However, they are often afraid to speak out because of the criticisms they would get from the media and atheist lobby.
I agree. That's a real problem today.
Oh my God, dude, give me a break. All right, so it appears as though the way that many stars are measured, the distance is measured, we use stellar parallax to measure stars between 300 light years away and 4 light years away. We measured a ton of them. And then we measured their intrinsic brightness using very sensitive machinery to determine how bright they are intrinsically. We use that measurement for stars that are further away. We use a similar method of light measurement to determine how many planets there are around stars, because this is a super interesting subject. I'm sorry, I'm going to go off on a little tangent here before we continue, but the center of gravity in our in our solar system is not the sun. That's not the center of gravity. The center of gravity is somewhere inside the sun, or maybe right outside the sun. The sun and the Earth are actually orbiting around a common point. It's like if two things are the exact same mass, like two binary stars, for example, one is not orbiting the other. They are orbiting each other in circles, like so. In the same vein, the Earth, the planets, everything is orbiting with the sun together. They're all orbiting together. So if you were to view the sun from a telescope from really far away, a very sensitive telescope that's designed really to only pick up light signatures, you'd be able to tell that the sun was wobbling. It was moving back and forth, along with the planets. And depending on how quickly or often or in what directions it's moving back and forth, you can determine how many planets there are surrounding the sun or the star or whatever, and how fast they're moving and how big they are and things like that. That's how we discover exoplanets largely. And it's something very similar to the Doppler effect. I'm sure you probably heard of the Doppler effect. That's the Doppler effect. As something is moving towards you, it gets louder, and as it moves further away, it gets quieter. And that's because the sound waves are compressing as they're coming closer to you, and they're expanding out as they're getting further away. Sound compression, or frequency or whatever, is what determines pitch. And if the frequency is getting spread out further as it moves away, then the pitch goes down. That's the Doppler effect. Well, light has a similar Doppler effect. The Doppler effect for light, though, is not getting loud or higher pitched or lower pitched. For light, it's getting blue or red. That's how you recognize the Doppler effect in light. So if we stare at a star in a telescope for long enough and get really sensitive equipment, look really, really closely, we can see a blue shift and a red shift. That is the sun or the star wobbling on a common point of gravity. That's how we tell that there are multiple planets around it and stuff. Anyway, sorry. Just went off on a tangent, but I think it's super interesting.
Need to have freedom to be able to speak on these topics.
Oh, and he's going to lay into this freedom nonsense too, of course.
You know, I just want to say, by the way,
I say freedom nonsense because these people are not, their freedom is not being like decreased or banned or barred or whatever. He's using it as a piece of propaganda. Everyone is free to do whatever they want. And I'm free as like an employer at a university or whatever. I'm free to not hire this person as a professor if I don't want, you know? Not that I'm an employer at a university. I'm just saying people have freedoms and you're not entitled to have this job or whatever.
The way that non-Christian scientists, I should say, non-Christian scientists are really borrowing from the Christian worldview anyway to carry out their experimental or observational
Right, totally.
science. Think about it. When they're doing observational science using the scientific method, they have to assume the laws of logic, they have to assume the laws of nature, they have to assume the uniformity of nature. I mean, think about it. If the universe came about by natural processes, where'd the laws of logic come from? Did they just pop into existence? Are we in a stage now where we only have half logic? So you see, I have a question for Bill Nye. How do you account for the laws of logic and the laws of nature from a naturalistic worldview that excludes the existence of God? Now, in my opening statement, I also discussed a different type of science or knowledge, origins or historical science. See, again, there's a confusion here, there's a misunderstanding here. People, by and large, have not been taught to look at what you believe about the past as different to what you're observing in the present. You don't observe the past directly. Even when you think about the creation account, I mean, we can't observe God creating. We can't.
I mean, Bill Nye eventually just shoots this idea down completely by accurately pointing out the fact that we're using all of the exact same methods today that we use when we look at the past. Everything is exactly the same. This guy's trying to look at it differently. He's trying to look at the past differently than we look at the past today. That's the hang-up here. Why did I come to... Oh, yeah. Ultimately, it all comes down to faith. I believe it because I believe it. I wish he'd just be honest about that fact. He's trying to come up with a scientific reason for why he believes this stuff. There is no scientific reason for this. You're full of shit. If you want to believe it just because you believe it, fine, but be honest about it at the very least.
Observe the creation of Adam and Eve. We admit that. We're willing to admit our beliefs about the past. But see, what you see in the present is very different. Even some public school textbooks, actually, well, they sort of acknowledge the difference between historical and observational science.
When he says some public school textbooks, what he means is one that was produced in 1997 or something, I'm guessing, right? I'm not even sure.
Here is an earth science textbook that's used in public schools, and we read this. In contrast to physical geology, the aim of historical geology is to understand Earth's long history. And then they make the statement, historical geology, so we're talking about historical science, tries to establish a timeline of the vast number of physical and biological changes that have occurred in the past. We study physical geology before historical geology because we first must understand how Earth works before we try to unravel its past. In other words,
so this was apparently published in 2006. This debate happened like a decade later or something. Didn't this debate happen like in 2016 or something? When did this get published? Yeah, 2014. Okay, so this single school textbook he found was like 10 years old or 8 years old or something like that, and not representative of the overall consensus in science. Good job. You found one thing that said one specific sentence that kind of a little bit backs up what you were saying, but not really. This is pretty much what, Bible readers do all the time. Pastors, especially the fundamentalist pastors, they'll find one verse in the Bible that agrees with them a little bit, kind of, and they will really lay into that verse.
Words, we observe things in the present, and then, okay, we're assuming that that's always happened in the past, and we're going to try and figure out how this happened. See, there is a difference between what you observe and what happened in the past. Let me illustrate it this way. If Bill Nye and I went to the Grand Canyon, we could agree that that's a Coconino sandstone in the Hermit Shale, and there's the boundary. They're sitting one on top of the other. We could agree on that. But do you know what we would disagree on? I mean, we could even analyze the minerals and agree on that. But we would disagree on how long it took to get there. But see, none of us saw the sandstone or the shale being laid down.
No, but we can run scientific experiments to determine how long that type of thing takes to lay down. We can find out roughly how long it would take, and there aren't just single examples that provide evidence for this. There are like a billion arrows pointing at this information, a billion examples of proof of how long it took to lay this stuff down. Ken Ham has no proof of his worldview. So what he's doing is trying to flip the burden of proof and say, we don't know, so I'm going to default to the Bible. No, we do know. He is rejecting what science says about this, what math and what the information that we've gathered has to say about this subject.
10 million year gap there. But I don't see a gap, but that might be different to what Bill Nye would see. But see, there's a difference between what you actually observe directly and then your interpretation in regard to the past. When I was at the Goddard Space Center a number of years ago, I met creationists and evolutionists who were both working on the Hubble telescope. They agreed on how to build a Hubble telescope.
What creationists were working on the Hubble telescope? Again, maybe there were some. If they were creationists, then they necessarily gave up their creationist views when they walked into the lab, because they can't possibly suspend the laws of logic when working on their basic stuff, when doing their day job. They can't.
You know what they disagreed on? Well, they disagreed on how to interpret the data that telescope obtained in regard to the age of the universe. And, we could go on and talk about lots of other similar sorts of things. For instance, I've heard Bill Nye talk about how a smoke detector works using the radioactive element americium. And you know what? I totally agree with him on that. We agree how it works. We agree how radioactivity enables that to work. But if you're then going to use radioactive elements and talk about the age of the Earth, you've got a problem because you weren't there. We've got to understand parent elements, daughter elements, and so on. We could agree whether you're a creationist or evolutionist on the technology to put the rover on Mars, but we're going to disagree on how to interpret the origin of Mars. I mean, there are some people that believe there was even a global flood on Mars and there's no liquid water on Mars.
There are not people who believe that actively. There were people who believed that, past tense, previously, thought that there was a global flood on Mars because they saw these little things running through Mars when they looked at it through a telescope, and they called them canals, and they came up, like, originally, like 200 years ago or something, when all this is first discovered. They came to the conclusion that there was a civilization on Mars that we weren't connected to or we couldn't see or whatever. And this civilization was building out blah, 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 whatever. It was all completely made up, all of it.
But, you know, we're going to disagree maybe on our interpretation of origins, and you can't prove either way because, not from an observational science perspective, because we've only got the present. Creationists and evolutionists both work on medicines and vaccines. You see, it doesn't matter whether you're a creationist or an evolutionist, all scientists have the same experimental or observational science. So I have a question for Bill Nye. Can you name one piece of technology that could only have been developed starting with a belief in molecules to man evolution? Now, here's another important fact.
Wait, could you come up with an example of something that could only be invented if you believe in molecules to man? I mean, you are rejecting basic laws of logic. You have to suspend your belief in creationism to operate in the scientific world.
Creationists and evolutionists all have the same evidence. Bill Nye and I have the same Grand Canyon. We don't disagree on that. We will have the same fish fossil. This is one from the Creation Museum. The same dinosaur skeletons, the same animals, the same humans, the same DNA, the same radioactive decay elements that we see. We have the same universe. Actually, we all have the same evidences. It's not the evidences that are different. It's a battle over the same evidence in regard to how we interpret the past. And you know why that is? Because it's really
because he believes the Bible, and that's his starting point, instead of the evidence being his starting point and working backwards from there. He starts with the Bible and works backwards from the Bible.
Battle over worldviews and starting points. It's a battle over philosophical worldviews and starting points, but the same evidence. Now, I admit my starting point is that God is the ultimate authority. But if someone doesn't accept that, then man has to be the ultimate authority. And
no, maybe there just is no ultimate authority. What are you talking about? You know what's most disturbing about this? The fact that he is dead set on having an ultimate authority. It's just bizarre.
That's really the difference when it comes down to it. You see, I've been emphasizing the difference between historical origin science, knowledge about the past when you weren't there, and we need to understand that we weren't there, or experimental or observational science, using your five senses in the present, the scientific method, what you can directly observe, test, repeat. There's a big difference between those two. And that's not what's being taught in our public.
There really isn't a big difference between observational and experimental or historical science or whatever it is. It's all the same. It's all we arrive at all this stuff in the exact same way. We come to the conclusions in the exact same way.
Schools, and that's why kids aren't being taught to think critically and correctly about the origins issue. But you know, it's also important to understand when talking about creation evolution, both involve historical science and observational science. You see, the role of observational science is this: it can be used to confirm or otherwise one's historical science based on one's starting point. Now, when you think about the debate topic and what I affirmed concerning creation, if our origins or historical science based on the Bible, the Bible's account of origins is true, then there should be predictions from this that we can test using observational science, and there are.
So is he saying if historical science, as he puts it, is true, we should be able to make predictions and stuff? I mean, yeah, there are predictions that we've made based on various things, and we found, like, for example, there was a prediction that one of the early creatures that developed the ability to climb on land would be found in this specific area in Canada. And sure enough, it was. Tiktaalik is its name. We discovered it in Canada because we came to certain conclusions based on the information that we had in front of us. That's historical science confirmed by observational science. I don't even know why I'm playing into his ridiculous division of these two things. They're the same thing.
For instance, based on the Bible, we'd expect to find evidence confirming an intelligence produced life. We'd expect to find evidence confirming after their kind. The Bible says God made kinds of animals and plants after their kind, implying each kind produces its own, not that one kind changes into another. You'd expect to find evidence confirming a global flood of Noah's day, evidence confirming one race of humans, because we all go back to Adam and Eve. Biologically, that would mean there's one race. Evidence confirming the Tower of Babel, that God gave different languages. Evidence confirming a young universe. Now, I can't go through all of those, but a couple of them we'll look at briefly. After their kind, evidence confirming...
You know what drives me nuts about this? This dude keeps, like... I can't even do it. Smacking his lips into the microphone. It drives me insane. You know who else does that? I'm sorry to say, Pat Ford from the David Pakman Show. He does that same shit. Smacks his lips into the microphone. I can't stand it, man. It drives me crazy. Please don't do that. Or cut it out when you do that.
In the Creation Museum, we have a display featuring replicas, actually, of Darwin's finches. They're called Darwin's finches. Darwin collected finches from the Galapagos and took them back to England, and we see the different species, the different beak sizes here. And, you know, from the specimens that Darwin obtained in the Galapagos, he actually pondered these things, and how do you explain this? And in his notes, actually, he came up with this diagram here, a tree. And he actually said, I think. So
yeah, he wasn't sure. This was his big discovery. You know, evolution was the discovery that he made when he went to the Galapagos Islands. We built upon that idea and tested it and learned from it and everything else, and sure enough, it was correct all along, we found out. But Darwin didn't have it all right through the entire book. See, this is really the issue. Ken Ham thinks that atheists view Darwin as a god or an authority of some sort. We don't. Never did. Atheists just want to understand the world around them. Some people have interesting, revolutionary, unique ideas, and then we build upon those ideas. Doesn't mean we treat them like they're gods. They're not. Nobody is a god out there.
he was talking about different species, and maybe those species came from some common ancestor. Actually, when it comes to finches, we actually would agree as creationists that different finch species came from a common ancestor, but a finch is what they would have to come from. But you see, Darwin wasn't just thinking about species. Darwin had a much bigger picture in mind. When you look at The Origin of Species and read that book, you'll find he made this statement.
For some reason, I thought it was The Origin of Man. That's weird. Okay.
When you look at The Origin of Species and read that book, you'll find he made this statement. From such low and intermediate form, both animals and plants may have been developed, and if we admit this, we must likewise admit that all organic beings which have ever lived on this earth may be descended from some one primordial form. So he had in mind what we today know as an evolutionary tree of life, that all life has arisen from some primordial form. Now, when you consider the classification system, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, we would say, as creationists, and we have many creation scientists who've researched this, and for lots of reasons, I would say the kind in Genesis 1 really is more at the family level of classification. For instance,
right, so there's this whole problem. What does kind mean? The book of Genesis, Noah's story, describes the kinds of animals he brought on. Like, he brought, I don't know, just tons and tons and tons of kinds. And kind is not a technical definition. Nobody understands. So most people define kind as species, but Ken Ham apparently describes it as family. Okay.
There's one dog kind, there's one cat kind, even though you have different genera, different species. That would mean, by the way, you didn't need anywhere near the number of animals on the ark as people think. You wouldn't need
Oh, isn't that convenient?
all the species of dogs, just two. Not all the species of cats, just two. And you see, based on the biblical account there in Genesis 1, creationists have drawn up what they believe is a creation orchard. In other words, they're saying, look, there's great variation in the genetics of dogs and finches and so on. And so over time, particularly after Noah's flood, you'd expect, if there were two dogs, for instance, you could end up with different species of dogs because there's an incredible amount of variability in the genes of any creature. And so you'd expect these different species up here, but there's limits. Dogs will always be dogs, finches will always be finches. Now,
there really aren't limits. I mean, we can look at whales, for example. Whales are mammals. They are like fish a lot, but they're mammals. We know for a fact that they're mammals. They breathe air. They have bone structure that's mammal-like. They're vertebrates and all that other stuff. Whales are mammals that live in the ocean. I think they're kind of like the hippopotamus, except they just went into the water and never came out eventually. So there are a billion different ways in which our understanding of the world around us has been affirmed over and over and over again by this scientific information. And Ken Ham seems to absolutely refuse to accept any of it, even when it's like proven to him unequivocally.
As a creationist, I maintain that observational science actually confirms this model based on the Bible. For instance, take dogs. Okay, in a scientific paper dated January 2014, that's this year, scientists...
Oh, 2014, okay. I guess that's when it came out.
...working at the University of California stated this: we provide several lines of evidence supporting a single origin for dogs and disfavoring alternative models in which dog lineages arise separately from geographically distinct wolf populations.
Okay, I don't know what magazine this is or journal, or if it's trustworthy or anything. I have no clue what this is all about, and I'm extremely skeptical of any sources that he gives, especially after seeing Kent Hovind, creationist Kent Hovind, and what he's had to say about stuff. I've learned enough to know that Kent Hovind lies professionally, basically. The dude lies for a living. He's a scam artist.
And they put this diagram in the paper. By the way, that diagram is very, very similar to this diagram that creationists proposed based upon the creation account in Genesis. And
wait, let's look at this. What is this? Golden jackal? What the hell's a golden jackal?
in other words, you have a common dog ancestor that gives rise to the different species of dogs, and that's exactly what we're saying here. Now, in the Creation Museum, we actually show the finches here, and you can see the finches with their different beaks beside dog skulls, different species of dogs. By the way, there's more variation in the dog skulls here than there are in these finches.
Yeah, but the dogs can interbreed with each other. This is a very advanced, well-understood area of study. Many of those finches can interbreed with each other also, but not all of them. At a certain point, they're different enough from each other that maybe they can interbreed, but the next generation, called the F1 generation, is incapable. It's sterile, basically. It's like horses and donkeys are different enough from each other, but similar enough to each other that they can breed, but the offspring they produce are sterile. That's where you get mules from. So, yeah, this is a very complex, well-understood area of study, and I would bet my life that either Ken Ham doesn't understand any of this, or he's just lying about it. Just flat-out lying. I'm not sure which it is.
Yet the dogs, well, that's never used as an example of evolution, but the finches are.
Dogs are used as an example of evolution. In fact, it's the perfect example of evolution.
Particularly in the public school textbooks, students are taught, see the changes that are occurring here? And here's another problem that we've got. Not only has the word science been hijacked by secularists, I believe the word evolution has been hijacked by secularists. The word evolution has been hijacked using what I call a bait and switch.
Oh, what he calls a bait and switch. Wow, he must have come up with this term himself, huh? Nobody ever heard the term bait and switch until Ken Ham used it. What he's doing right now is he's attempting to change language that everybody uses. We all have a common understanding of certain words, and he's modifying our understanding and coming up with his own kind of private language here. That's simply not how it works, bro. You can't just change language to be something other than what everyone else understands it to be.
Let me explain to you. The word evolution is being used in public school textbooks, and we often see it in documentaries and so on. It's used for observable changes that we would agree with, and then used for unobservable changes, such as molecules to man. Let me explain to you what's really going on, because I was a science teacher in the public schools, and
Oh, don't tell me that.
I know what the students were taught, and I check the public school textbooks anyway to know what they're taught. See, students are taught today, look, there's all these different animals, plants, but they're all part of this great big tree of life that goes back to some primordial form.
Well, this isn't like speculation. This isn't an assumption. This isn't a theology that we believe with no basis. We have DNA testing. We can compare and contrast the various genes that we have. You know, we share 7% DNA with viruses. What's our DNA percentage? I think it's 98% with monkeys. We can see where one of our chromosomes is fused together. We have 23 chromosomes plus the 2 sex chromosomes. Right. No, I'm sorry. We have 22 chromosomes plus the 2 sex ones. So we have, I don't even remember. But anyways, we are the 5th great ape species. How much DNA do we share with bananas? Wow, that's a common question, apparently. If we only look at the protein-making genes, we humans share about 40% of our genes with bananas. We are all very, very similar to each other. Every living thing on planet Earth is linked genetically.
Look, we see changes in finches, changes in dogs, and so on. Now, we don't deny the changes. You see that. You see different species of finches, different species of dogs. But then they put it all together in this evolutionary tree. But that's what you don't observe. You don't observe that. That's belief.
No, we do observe that through DNA evidence and everything. There are a billion ways that we have to observe this information.
There. That's their historical science. I would say was wrong. But you know what you do
Okay, well, I simply disagree, good sir.
observe? You do observe different species of dogs, different species of finches, but then there are limits, and you don't see one kind changing into another. Actually,
Yes, you do. Are you kidding me? We don't see that specifically with like dogs or horses or whatever, because they're very, very complex creatures. However, we do see that with bacteria. There is E. coli bacteria whose generation lasts, 8 hours or something like that? And over the course of 30 years or so, we can watch these E. coli bacteria grow and evolve and change and develop the ability to do certain things that it couldn't do before. Incredibly. In fact, a variety of different E. coli groupings all evolve different abilities when they're co-evolving. We can observe this stuff happening in a lab. We can see this taking place. He's just pretending we can't.
we're told that if you teach creation in the public schools, that's teaching religion. If you teach evolution, that's science. And I'm going to say, wait a minute. Actually, the creation model here, based upon the Bible, observational science confirms this. This is what...
No, it does not. It is completely debunked by what we observe in the world around us.
What you observe. You don't observe this tree. Actually, it's the public school textbooks that are teaching a belief, imposing it on students, and they need to be teaching them observational science to understand.
Well, we observe what is taught about evolution. That is all observed directly. So I don't know what to tell him.
Understand the reality of what's happening. Now, What we found is that
I get really sick of him smacking his lips into the microphone, seriously. If I ever do that, I cut it out after the fact. It's it's probably one of the most frustrating things on planet Earth to me when somebody does that shit. For real. Don't smack your stupid lips into the microphone, please. I'm begging you.
public school textbooks present the evolutionary tree as science, but reject the creation orchard as religion. But observational science confirms the creation orchard. So public school textbooks are rejecting observational science and imposing a naturalistic religion on students. The word evolution has been hijacked using a bait and switch to indoctrinate students to accept evolutionary belief as observational science. Let me introduce you to another scientist, Richard Lenski, Michigan State University. He's a great scientist. He's known for culturing E. coli in the lab. And he found there were some E. coli that actually seemed to develop the ability to grow on substrate, on citrate in the substrate.
Right. He's actually referencing the study that I was talking about earlier where E. coli was capable of actually evolving a new ability that it did not have before. Usually when this comes up, creationists will argue that there's never any new information. That information was already in there. It was just that a switch was flipped and it gave the E. coli the ability to survive on citrate, which it did not have before, which is completely absurd. There is absolutely no reason to believe anything that they're saying here. That study is real, but his interpretation of it, his explanation of it, is based on nothing.
Richard Lenski is here mentioned in this book, and it's called Evolution in the Lab. So the ability to grow on citrate is said to be evolution. And there are those that say, hey, this is against the creationists. For instance, Jerry Coyne from University of Chicago says, Lenski's experiment is also yet another poke in the eye for anti-evolutionists.
That's correct.
He says the thing I like most is that it says you can get these complex traits evolving by a combination of unlikely events. But is it a poke in the eye for anti-evolutionists?
Yes.
Is it really seeing complex traits evolving? What does it mean that some of these bacteria are able to grow on citrate? Let me introduce you to another biblical creationist who is a scientist.
Hi, my name is Dr. Andrew Fabich. I got my PhD from the University of Oklahoma in microbiology. I teach at Liberty University and I do research on E. coli in the intestine. I've published in secular journals from the American Society for Microbiology, including infection immunity and applied environmental microbiology, as well as several others. My work has been cited even the past year in the journals Nature, Science Translational Medicine, Public Life.
Yeah, I don't know how legitimate he is. He claims to be, but these people have a tendency to lie constantly. But you know what? Okay, let's just assume he's telling the truth and he's actually a legitimate scientist. Go on.
Library of Science, Public Library of Science Genetics. It's cited regularly in those journals. And while I was taught nothing but evolution, I don't accept that position. And I do my research from a creation perspective. When I look at the evidence that people cite of E. coli supposedly evolving over 30 years, over 30,000 generations in the lab, and people say that it is now able to grow on citrate. I don't deny that it grows on citrate, but it's not any kind of new information. The information's already there, and it's just a switch that gets turned on and off.
Okay, so I don't remember if I discussed this earlier or not, so I'm going to discuss it again just in case. Evolution has three main pillars. The first pillar is reproduction. You have to reproduce. Right now, when you reproduce, genes get duplicated and fed into the system. You know, with humans, for example, or with plants or whatever, with everything, genes are large swaths of genetic material are duplicated. Like the gene for blue eyes is duplicated 2, 3, 4 times. Redundancies. It's not required to have like multiple copies of this, but it doesn't hurt anything, so it stays. On average, when babies are born, they have about 20,000 different genes a baby typically has about 70 gene mutations every time the baby is born. So there are a bunch of duplications, a billion different eye color genes and height genes and all kinds of other genes like that, right? And when a baby is born or when a baby is produced, it has 70 different mutations that take place on average every time the reproduction cycle takes place. And those mutations can be good or bad. So the first pillar of evolution is reproduction. And then the second is gene duplication. And then the third is mutation. Good mutations stay and benefit people more and propagate through populations. And bad mutations are more likely to kill the person off faster. Right? So I have this thing called pectus excavatum, which basically, for all intents and purposes, means I don't have a breastplate. And you can literally feel my heart through my chest. You can feel my heart beating through my chest. Like you can touch it through my skin, right? That's dangerous, extremely dangerous. Not for me, because I know it's there and I'll be fine. However, people are less likely to survive with that condition. Maybe only 95% of people survive rather than 100% of people, or 99 or 98% of the people. Maybe it lowers the percentage rate by only 5%. That could be. But over the course of hundreds of years, thousands of years, tens of thousands of years, that 5% adds up until it's worked out of the population. Now everybody who had that condition no longer exists because it was disadvantageous. That is how selection works. Natural selection, and then there's sexual selection. Attractiveness is selected for, and attractiveness includes having big muscles, being strong, being intelligent, things like that. And then there's artificial selection, actively choosing the most delicious apple in the orchard, that kind of thing. So anyways, those are the pillars to evolution. Now, what this guy is disputing is the fact that genes, when they're duplicating, create redundancies. He's denying that, I guess either he's denying that the redundancies get worked into the system, or he's denying that any mutations take place. I'm not sure which part of the equation he's denying, but if he really is an evolutionary biologist, which I'm honestly starting to doubt, he's simply wrong and should have his title stripped from him. That's absurd. Sounds like CPR could be problematic. I don't think so, because I have to position myself. Yeah, I mean, it could be problematic, but I think that a trained CPR, a trained paramedic or doctor or whatever would know what to do. If you want to, I haven't talked about this very often or even shown this very much, but here, take a look. This is my chest. So you can kind of see. There, see? That's perfect. You can see the shadowing perfectly. And if you look right, I have to suck in. Right here is my heart. I can feel it. It's bumping. So, anyways, that's my condition. I think people would probably find a way to give me chest compressions if need be, and it wouldn't be terribly dangerous, but yeah. So, now you know.
See, students need to be told what's really going on here. Certainly there's change, but it's not change necessary for molecules to man. Now, we could look at other predictions. What about evidence confirming one race? Well, when we look at the human population, we see lots of differences. But based on Darwin's ideas of human evolution as presented in The Descent of Man, I mean, Darwin did teach in The Descent of Man there are lower races and higher races. Would you believe that back in the 1900s, one of the most popular biology textbooks used in the public schools in America taught this? At the present time, there exist upon Earth 5 races, or varieties of man, and finally the highest type of all, the Caucasians.
Yeah, I don't know if this is even true, but it wouldn't surprise me. Let's just assume it's true. Again, I doubt all of his sources. All of them. You shouldn't be believing a word out of this guy's mouth unless you directly check it yourself, really. The guy lies for a living, okay? But, okay, sure, I don't really have a problem accepting that, it was a common belief at the time. Yeah, people believed that white people were superior to black people in the West. You know who propagated that belief more than any other group? White evangelical extremists in the South. People were using the Bible to justify slavery. Didn't make it difficult. It's right there in the Bible, an explanation of how you're supposed to treat your slaves and who you're supposed to enslave and all that other stuff. It's right there, black and white. So if you suddenly believe that Christianity is like some bastion of freedom, then you are mistaken. I'm sorry.
Represented by the civilized white inhabitants of Europe and America. Can you imagine if that was in the public schools today? And yet, that's what was taught, but it was based on Darwin's ideas that are wrong. You have a wrong foundation. You're going to have a wrong worldview. Now, had they started from the Bible and from the creation account in the Bible, what does it teach? Well, we're all descendants of Adam and Eve. We go through the Tower of Babel, different languages, so different people groups formed, distinct characteristics, but we'd say, you know what, that means there's biologically only one race of humans. Well, I mentioned Dr. Venter before, and he was a researcher with the Human Genome Project, and you'll remember in the year 2000, this was headline news, and what we read was this: they had put together a draft of the entire sequence of the human genome and unanimously declared there is only one race, the human race. Wow.
Correct.
Wow, who would have guessed? But you see...
I love it how he's pretending that Christianity, this entire time, has believed everybody was equal since the very beginning. I love how he's pretending that, there's never been any bigotry ever within Christianity. Absolutely absurd. He's retconning that into Christian ideology, Christian history. It's absurd, seriously.
There we have observational science confirming the creation account, not confirming at all Darwin's ideas. Now, there's much more that could be said on each of these topics. Obviously, you can't do that in a short...
The real problem is that he's treating Darwin as though he's some kind of a god. Like he thinks that Darwin is our god, our final authority on everything. I don't know, if Darwin was racist or if he was just, informed by the culture of the time or if he what. I have no clue. But I do know that he was incorrect. See? How hard is that to say? Guy was wrong on some things. Boom. He was also very right on some things. We aren't believing Darwin because Darwin said it and he's a trustworthy figure because he's Darwin. We believe Darwin because we tested it and verified it. But this guy doesn't seem to understand the concept of not believing what somebody says by default. If you automatically believe, if you believe one thing that they've said, you must automatically accept everything else that they've said without question. It's just absurd.
Short time like this, and you could do a lot more research. I suggest you visit our website at Answers in Genesis for a lot more information. Is creation a viable model of origins in today's scientific era? I said we need to define the terms, and particularly the term science and the term evolution, and I believe we need to understand how they're being used to impose an anti-God religion on generations of unsuspecting students.
An anti-God religion.
You see, I keep emphasizing we do need to understand the difference between experimental or observational science and historical science. And you know what? The secularists don't like me doing this because they don't want to admit that there's a belief aspect to what they're saying.
There is not a belief aspect to what anybody says within science. Everything that is espoused within science today is based on hard facts, on evidence, on knowledge, not belief. You either accept evolution or reject evolution. It's not something you believe or don't believe. It's a knowledge claim. It's a yes or no situation. God is something that you believe or don't believe. Evolution is accepted or rejected.
And there is, and they can't get away from it.
Tell you what I can't get away from. I've struggled with this my entire life, honestly. It's been really hard. Especially as an atheist. When I became atheist, this became like the central figure of my struggle in life, I have tried so hard to stay away from your mom and just cannot manage it.
Get away from it. Let me illustrate this with a statement from Bill Nye.
That you can show the earth is not flat. You can show the earth is not 10,000 years old.
By the way, I agree. You can show the earth is not flat.
Well, what I guess he's failing to understand, maybe intentionally, is the fact that Bill Nye is pointing out that they're both equally as absurd. The earth isn't 10,000 years old. The earth is not flat.
A video from the Galileo spacecraft showing the earth, and speeded up, of course, but spinning. You can see it's a sphere. You can observe that. You can't observe the age of the earth.
Well, flat earthers would say you can't observe that. They're making the exact same argument that Ken Ham is making. They're just making it about something else. And Ken Ham is, in the exact same way, denying the evidence presented by regular, normal science and saying, well, I wasn't there to see it, so I have no reason to believe it. Well, flat earthers aren't there to see that the earth is round, so they have no reason to believe it in the exact same way. He's acting like he is somehow better than or above flat earthers. No, this conspiracy theory is basically the same.
You don't see that. You see, again, I emphasize there's a big difference between historical science, talking about the past, and observational science, talking about the present. And I believe what's happening is this, that students are being indoctrinated by the confusion of terms. The hijacking of the word science and the hijacking of the word evolution in a bait and switch. Let me illustrate further with this video clip, because here I assert that Bill Nye is equating observational science with historical science.
That's because there's no difference.
And I also say it's not a mystery when you understand the difference.
Apparently, people with these deeply held religious beliefs, they embrace that whole literal interpretation of the Bible as written in English as a worldview. And
dude, I love it, as written in English. I can appreciate that. He's making a point that the interpretation of the Bible, the translation of the Bible isn't even accurate, almost certainly. But the interpretation of the Bible in its most recent translation in English is just terrible. It's ridiculous.
At the same time, they accept aspirin, antibiotic drugs, airplanes, but they're able to hold these two worldviews. And this is a mystery.
Actually, I suggest to you it's not a mystery. You see, when I'm talking about antibiotics, aspirin, smoke detectors, jet planes, that's Ken Ham, the observational science bloke. I'm an Australian. We call guys blokes, okay?
Oh my God, dude. He's just trying to be this charismatic dude, and he's failing miserably.
But when you're talking about creation in thousands of years or the age of the earth, that's Ken Ham, the historical science bloke. I'm willing to admit that. Now, when Bill Nye's talking about aspirin, antibiotics, jet planes, smoke detectors, he does a great job at that. I used to enjoy watching him on TV too. That's Bill Nye, the observational science guy. But when he's talking about evolution of millions of years, I'm challenging him that that's Bill Nye, the historical science guy.
There is no difference. We arrive at these conclusions in the exact same way.
And I challenge the evolutionists to admit the belief aspects of their particular worldview. Now, at the Creation Museum, we're only too willing to admit our beliefs based upon the Bible, but we also teach people the difference between beliefs and what one can actually observe and experiment with in the present. I believe...
Well, there you go. He says that he admits that he has a bias and a worldview. Thus, why should I believe a word out of his mouth? There's no reason to believe anything that he says. When he tells me I am biased, he's basically saying I cannot be trusted to give you the facts and only the facts. I am going to alter the way that I view the world based on my already held beliefs. How can you possibly expect to get down to true, real information if you know you're doing that?
We're teaching people to think critically and to think in the right terms about science. I believe it's the creationists that should be educating the kids out there, because
of course he does.
Because we're teaching them the right way to think. You know, we admit our origins of historical science is based upon the Bible, but I'm just challenging evolutionists to admit the belief aspects of evolution and be upfront about the difference here. As I said, I'm only too willing to admit my historical science based on the Bible. And let me further go on and define the term creation.
Look, his historical science based on the Bible, the issue is that it completely contradicts everything that we've learned and that we know about society, about humanity, about history and science and everything. It contradicts everything that we have come to understand over the past 2,000 years, 5,000 years, however many thousands of years. Contradicts all of it. So I really don't know how he arrives at these conclusions without just straight up being biased.
Creation as we use it. By creation, we mean, here at Answers in Genesis and the Creation Museum, we mean the account based on the Bible. Yes, I take Genesis as literal history, as Jesus did. And here at the Creation Museum, we walk people through that history. We walk them through creation, a perfect creation. God made Adam and Eve, land animal kind, sea creatures, and so on. And then sin and death entered the world, so there was no death before sin. That means, how can you have billions of dead things before man sinned? And then the catastrophe of Noah's flood.
Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of issues with what he believes. I love that he's pointing that out right now. It's just complete nonsense. Everything that he's saying right now is pointing to the fact that he's wrong about all of this.
If there was a global flood, you'd expect to find billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth. Had to say that because a lot of our supporters would want me to. And what do you find? Billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth. Confusion, the Tower of Babel. God gave different languages, so you get different people groups. So this is the geological, astronomical, anthropological, biological history as recorded in the Bible. So this is concerning what happened in the past that explains the present. And then, of course, that God's Son stepped into history to be Jesus Christ, the God-man, to die on a cross, be raised from the dead, and one day there's going to be a new heavens and a new earth to come. And, you know, not only is this an understanding of history to explain the geology, biology, astronomy, and so on, to connect the present to the past, but it's also a foundation for our whole worldview. For instance, in Matthew 19, when Jesus was asked about marriage, he said, "Have you not read? He which made the beginning made them male and female, and said, for this cause shall a man leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and they'll be one flesh." He quoted from Genesis as literal history, Genesis 1 and 2. God invented marriage, by the way. That's where marriage comes from, and it's to be...
Really? He invented marriage as one man and one woman? Is that why his people, you know, King David and others, had so many different wives? Is that why it wasn't one man and one woman for so long? It was one man and one woman and one woman and one woman? I mean, that's not the only example of it either. There were a billion different forms of marriage in the Bible that people didn't seem to have a problem with before, and they were supposedly godly people. Yeah, Abraham is another example. God's main man, Abraham. He had like a billion wives, and some of them were his cousins, right?
A man and a woman. And not only marriage, ultimately, every single biblical doctrine of theology, directly or indirectly, is founded in Genesis. Why is there sin in the world? Genesis. Why is there death? Genesis. Why do we wear clothes? Genesis. Why did Jesus die on a cross? Genesis. It's a very important book. It's foundational to...
Yeah, no, he's just reading into all of this.
all Christian doctrine.
Like, the book of Genesis doesn't say almost anything that he just described. The book of Genesis is just being read into and assumed that it talks about that stuff. It's like the book of Genesis, for example, never says Satan deceived Eve and convinced her to eat the apple. At no point does it ever say that. It says a snake deceived Eve and tricked her into eating a fruit, not an apple, not Satan. Jews did not have a concept for Satan at the time. It wasn't until thousands of years after all of that supposedly took place. And they certainly didn't have a concept for Satan when that was recorded, when the book of Genesis was written in the first place. By the way, the Noah story, complete ripoff of the Epic of Gilgamesh, which was written before the Noah story. Just saying.
And you see, when we look at that, what I call the 7 C's of history that we walk people through here at the museum, Think about how it all connects together. A perfect creation, it'll be perfect again in the future. Sin and death entered the world. That's why God's Son died on the cross, and to conquer death and offer a free gift of salvation. The flood of Noah's day, a reminder that the flood was a judgment because of man's wickedness, but at the same time a message of God's grace and salvation, as Noah and his family had to go through a door to be saved, so we need to go through a door to be saved. Jesus Christ said, "I am the door, by me if any man enter in, he'll be saved." And we make no apology about the fact that what we're on about is this. If you confess with your mouth the Lord Jesus and believe in your heart God has raised him from the dead, you'll be saved. Now, as soon as I say that, people say, see, if you allow creation in schools, for instance, if you allow students to even hear about it, this is religion.
Yeah, exactly. It is. If you allow it in, they're going to shove religion down people's throats. Absolutely.
Let me illustrate this, talking about a recent battle in Texas over textbooks in the public school. A newspaper report said this: textbook and classroom curriculum battles have long ranged in Texas, pitting creationists, those who see God's hand in the creation of the universe, against academics. Stop right there. Notice, creationists, academics. Creationists can't be academics. Creationists can't be scientists. See, it's the way things are worded out there.
Well, if you're a creationist and you're also a scientist, you put your creationist ideas to one side when you operate. You must. Or you can't operate in this sphere as a legitimate researcher. You just can't. If something is published, then it does not include their creationist extremist views, or it's not influenced by it.
It's an indoctrination that's going on, who worry about religious and political ideology trumping scientific fact. Wait a minute, what do they mean by science? You're talking about what you observe, or you're talking about your beliefs about the past? Now, Kathy Miller is the president of the Texas Freedom Network, and she's vocally spoken out. She's spoken out about this textbook battle there in Texas. And the mission statement of the organization she's president of says, the Texas Freedom Network advances a mainstream agenda of religious freedom and individual liberties to counter the religious right. Religious freedom, individual liberties. And then she makes this statement.
Wait, what was it she said? Texas Freedom Network advances a mainstream agenda of religious freedom and individual liberties to counter the religious right. I don't understand what he's trying to get at with this. I don't even know what the Texas Freedom Network is.
And the mission statement of the organization she's president of says, the Texas Freedom Network advances a mainstream agenda of religious freedom and individual liberties to counter the religious right. Religious freedom, individual liberties. And then she makes this statement. Science education, what does she mean by science, should be based on mainstream science education, not on personal ideological beliefs of unqualified.
Right, and he said earlier, he has built his entire ideology off of religious belief. He says, I admit that I start from the biblical narrative of the Bible is correct in its origin, or blah, 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 whatever. He admitted to that. So what do you want me to do with that? You admitted to me you have bias and that you have your whole thing is based on religious ideology. You admitted to that. I don't understand what he's complaining about. They're accurately representing what he said.
Qualified reviewers. Wait a minute, they want religious liberty and not personal ideological beliefs? I assert this. Public school textbooks are using the same word science for observational and historical science. They arbitrarily define science as naturalism and outlaw the supernatural. They present molecules to man evolution as fact, and they're imposing the religion of naturalism on generations of students.
I'll tell you what science does. It does not exclude supernatural events by default. Science doesn't exclude anything by default. Science includes all possibilities. It's just every time something's tested or tweaked or worked on or studied or learned about, the answer is always some natural explanation, not supernatural. That's all. We get one example of a supernatural explanation, and you've got believers across the world in your ideology, just like that. One proven supernatural explanation is all I'm looking for. All anyone is looking for.
Imposing their ideology on the students, that everything's explained by natural processes. That is a religion. What does she mean by religious liberty? They tolerate their religion. See, the battle is really about...
No, it's not. That's not what she means by religious liberty. What she means is exactly what I mean when I say I believe in religious liberty. I want everybody to be free to worship God the way that they see fit, up to, but not including, interfering with other people's free will or personal decisions. You cannot force me to do something based on your interests or feelings or beliefs. You can't force your religion on my kids. He said, my starting point is the Bible. Well, that's not my starting point. That's not my kid's starting point. It shouldn't be. We should be basing the science curriculum off of what we can physically prove. If you can physically, directly prove to me a supernatural explanation, great, fine, I'm happy. Start teaching that in the classroom. Start teaching that supernatural explanation. You can prove that God did it, prove it. And suddenly you got a believer. The thing is, there is no proof. It is based on faith, plain and simple. This is all based on faith. And you know what? Fine. You want it to be based on faith? Fine. Base it on faith. But don't shove it down anyone else's throat. Faith is belief in something without evidence. If you have evidence, you don't need faith. If you need faith, you don't have evidence. Faith and evidence are mutually exclusive. Everything that we learn in school, everything that kids are taught should be evidence-based, period. You come up with a supernatural explanation that's provable, fine.
Authority. It's more than just science or evolution or creation. It's about who is the authority in this world, man or God. If you start with naturalism, then what about morals? Who decides right and wrong?
Well, you decide right and wrong. I mean, you, Ken Ham, you decide it for yourself. Everybody decides right and wrong for themselves, and it's almost always based on cultural values. I say that with complete confidence because there is a verse to back up any moral position in the Bible. If you want to believe it, it's in there. There is a Bible verse to support it because it was written by dozens of authors over thousands of years of varying levels of wealth and fame and notoriety and power and influence and moral values. The Bible was written by all kinds of different people. There is no single solitary moral system that you can find in the Bible. It just doesn't, it's just not there. So Ken Ham walked into his reading of the Bible with some key beliefs that he already holds. I believe that being gay is wrong. I believe that whatever. I believe that marriage is between one man and one woman and polygamy is wrong and this and that is wrong. He already believes all of this stuff. And then he finds the verses retroactively to support it.
Well, it's subjective. Marriage, well, whatever you want it to be. Get rid of old people. I mean, why not? I mean, they're just animals. They're costing us a lot of money.
Wait, does the Bible say that you shouldn't get rid of old people specifically? I don't remember that part.
Abortion, get rid of spare cats, get rid of spare kids. We're all animals. But if you start...
Okay, nobody believes that, holds that position. Nobody's ever espoused that. Like, I don't know what he's even talking about right now. He's trying to make people who accept the fact of evolution, he's trying to make them look like monsters. When in reality, the positions that he's just, expressed, euthanasia and moral relativism and all that stuff, those have largely been pushed and expressed by right-wing extremist Christians throughout history.
Apart from God's word, there are moral absolutes. God decides right and wrong. Marriage, one man and one woman. Sanctity of life. We care for old people. They're made in the image of God. Life begins at fertilization, so abortion is killing a human being. We do see the collapse.
See, that's the thing. Life begins at conception. That's not expressed anywhere in the Bible. See, that's that's what's happening here, really. He's claiming that the Bible supports his view, or that he just follows what the Bible says, but he kind of inserts his own little definition of something surreptitiously, like behind the scenes, just kind of inserts it in there and pretends that the Bible establishes that. The Bible doesn't say anything about life beginning at conception. You know what the Bible says about it? It says you should get an abortion if you think your spouse has cheated on you. It even describes how to go about doing it. It's endorsed by God. The priest is supposed to perform the abortion. That's what the Bible says about it. There is a single verse where God is talking about one of his prophets, and he says he knew the prophet was going to exist before he even did. Basically, he knew he was going to be around before he was even born. And people take that to mean, oh, God thinks life begins at conception. No. That's just a piece of propaganda these people came up with. Really, this started with Jerry Falwell, Billy Graham, Franklin Graham, all the way back between the 40s and the 80s and the 90s. That's when this was really formed out. And the reason why they picked this abortion, this issue, to be the issue that they really lean into is because they recognize if you can convince people that murder is taking place, they will they will crawl over broken glass to stop it from happening. It is a quick and easy way to breed extremists. If you can convince them somebody is dying when they shouldn't be. That's why this issue was picked by the likes of Jerry Falwell Sr. and others. Because it's valuable. It's useful. It's an easy way to propagandize and manipulate people. Not because the Bible supports it. It doesn't. Because they're easy to manipulate with it. Simple as that.
Of Christian morality in our culture and increasing moral relativism because generations of kids are being taught the religion of naturalism and that the Bible can't be trusted. And so again I say, creation is the only viable model of historical science confirmed by observational science in today's modern scientific era. You know what? I'm a science teacher. I want to see kids talk.
Don't tell me that.
Science. I love science. I want to see more Dr. Demadians in the world. You know, if we teach them the whole universe is a result of natural processes and not designed by a creator God, they might be looking in the wrong places or have the wrong idea when they're looking at the creation in regard to how you develop technology, because if they look on it as just random processes, that could totally influence the way they think. If they understand it was a perfect world marred by sin, that could have a great effect on how they then look for overcoming diseases and problems in the world. I want children to be taught the right foundation, that there's a God who created them, who loves them, who died on the cross for them, and that they're special. They're made in the image of God.
Okay, I guess that was the end of, Ken Hamm's part. Bill Nye comes in next and absolutely obliterates everything that he said in phenomenal ways. I absolutely love it, dude. Bill Nye is awesome.